So welcome to our digital presentation of Old Apple Tree and Remembrance. My name is Brad Richardson, and I'm the Executive Director at the Clark County Historical Museum. Now, today, we're honoring the memory of our old apple tree, which has been a constant part of our history for roughly 194 years. Now, right now, I am standing in front of one of the old apple tree's descendants. Now, our program today is going to feature local historians and storytellers guiding us through all of this important history. But before we get started with our program, we want to thank our generous sponsor, RealVest. Without RealVest's support today, we wouldn't be able to make this program happen. We also want to thank generous support from the City of Vancouver. They are an additional sponsor for today's program. And we also want to mention Wager Audio. Without Wager Audio, this digital feed wouldn't be possible, and so we really want to thank them for that. So if you have any needs for digital programs or events, you should definitely check out Wager Audio. So now, let's get to our first speaker. It's my great honor to introduce Clark County historian Pat Gelotta. Pat is going to guide us through the tale of our old apple tree. Take it away, Pat.
Hello, I'm Pat Gelotta, and I'm here to talk about the history of the tree. And the history of the tree starts with a love story. A young British soldier, Lieutenant Williamson, was given a party to say goodbye in London before he departed for the wilderness of Fort Vancouver. And at dessert, they had an apple. And his sweetheart took the core of the apple and handed it to him and said, "Here, when you reach your new home in the wilderness, should you ever think of me, plant these seeds." So he departed. He came to Fort Vancouver. And some weeks later, he put on the jacket again for the dinner party. And there in the pocket was this apple core, now dried, of course, and the seeds. And he took them to Dr. John McLaughlin, who was delighted as he was to have anything to improve the fort. And he planted the seeds first under glass because it was winter. And then in the spring, he set out the 6 trees, 6 apple trees. And the trees grew. And the Hudson's Bay Company left. And the army came in. And through the years, the trees stood there. One young lieutenant, breveted captain, named Ulysses S. Grant, was living in Quartermaster Ranch, which was just off 5th Street. And he was there with Rufus Ingalls and Captain Stevens. And he wrote to his wife, Julia. And in one letter, he mentioned that out the back door of his house, he could see the apple trees that the Hudson's Bay Company had planted. And he moved on to bigger and better things. And came the Depression, and General George C. Marshall, arrived to command the barracks. They needed the land that the trees stood on. And so he ordered them removed. And soldiers began to cut down the trees. And they came to one, and in the tree was a nest with hatchlings in it. And they went to the general and they said, "Can we leave this tree until the hatchlings leave the nest, until they're ready to fly?" General certainly can. So that tree stayed. And by the time the nestlings flew away, they'd forgotten all about it and moved on to other things. And so the tree still stood. Gradually, other trees in other places were planted, and Washington State became known for its apples. And someone realized, for heaven's sakes, we have the very first apple tree ever is standing right here in our town. And here was this little tree. And we realized we had something special. So a sign was put up. Oldest apple tree. The first apple tree. It's not that our apple crops all sprang from that tree, but it's just that was the first one. And it did show how well apples can do in our climate. The tree has been threatened, was threatened many times. The most devastating threat, however, was the 14, State Road 14, because it was going to take out the tree. And the people of Clark County rallied around our old tree, our old friend. And we prevailed upon the state to move the freeway. They moved the freeway to spare the apple tree, and a park was developed around it as it stood in its little enclave all by itself. In 1805 and 1806, Lewis and Clark had sailed past our shore on the Columbia River, and they looked at us and said that this was the most suitable site for habitation that they had yet seen west of the Rocky Mountains, and they were right. They sailed past us on down to Astoria and then sailed back. So now comes the bicentennial of the Lewis and Clark journey. 100 years ago, 1905, 1906, the celebration was held in Portland, where Lewis and Clark never went. But this year, the decision was made that we were going to celebrate the bicentennial of Lewis and Clark. And as we made our preparation, as we did big dreams for what's really not a big city, Maya Lin, the woman who designed the incredible Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C., was contacted and asked to design something for Lewis and Clark. Well, she was not particularly interested in that until we began to talk about Lewis and Clark from the First Nations point of view, how the people who were living along the river saw Lewis and Clark and what it meant to them. And then she was interested. And then was born not just Vancouver, but the whole idea of a confluence. In other words, where the rivers would come together, where Lewis and Clark would, the snake and the Columbia and the ocean, where the waters met, where the confluences, and there would be placed monuments where these rivers, where these waters met. And what should be done here? A column, a statue of Lewis and Clark. But no, this was Maya Lin after all. And she developed the idea of a land bridge, a bridge reconnecting the land, the National Park Service land, the Fort Vancouver land, connecting that with the river. And thus was born the idea of the land bridge, which we now see crossing the 14 and joining the land with trees and plants growing on this land bridge. And it reaches ground on the south side of the freeway. It opens up into the old apple tree park. So the apple tree is again joined to the rest of Fort Vancouver out of its little enclave where it sits. If you go to that little park, as you leave, do look up at the railway sign over your head, and it says Old Apple Tree. That's so where the engineers know they're coming into Vancouver when they reach that sign that says Apple Tree, a part of all of our lives here in Vancouver. But it was such a special tree. Mr. Kornberg, who was a horticulturist, took many cuttings from the tree, planted them, just as he did with the witness tree. Other people, I'm sure you've heard from them, have talked about taking cuttings and planting the tree everywhere. There is one that stands by the Clark County Historical Museum on the north side. It's getting old itself now. It's been there for just a look since the 1950s, that tree, and it does still bear apples, as did the old apple tree. They taste rather quincy. They're a baking apple, kind of sour. I understand horses love them. One of our curators at the museum lived near horses and would take apples from the tree to the horses. Another tree stands at the what I call the Potato Patch Monument, the monument that stands on Fifth Street, dedicated to the potato patch that Ulysses S. Grant started. So here and there around the county are scions of the old apple tree. Each year we celebrate the tree, and we had apple pressings, and people could have cuttings from the tree to take home and plant. Where those are, they're all over. It would be nice if people who had cuttings from the tree would let us know, and we could kind of keep a directory of where the tree is. And slowly we began to realize that this tree indeed had lived past its prime, and things happened to it. The trunk split. We had people come to rescue the tree. We actually did surgeries on the tree, braces to keep it standing, to just make it last a little longer. And a little longer the tree stood. And then they realized that the leaves were wilting. The main veins running up through the tree that brought nutrients from the roots were cut, and the tree was doomed. But what they saw around it were shoots coming up from the roots, little saplings, little efforts to live by this valiant old tree, sending up sprouts. And ordinarily you'd cut those off, but now they saw this was connected to those ancient roots, the struggle to survive for the old tree. And they kept them, and they groomed them. So now the tree has been declared dead. What will happen to it? Well, part of it is going to be taken off and kept by the National Park Service. But the rest will be left as nature would have intended, to decay and feed those new shoots, the new life that's coming up from our old friend. So though it's been declared dead, it's still saying, hey, I'm still here. Wait another 100 years. I'll be right where I was before. That's the story of our old apple tree.
Thank you, Pat, for another great local history lesson. So up next, I want to introduce Marie Nunn and her daughter, Molly McClure. Now, Marie has lived in Vancouver for many years, and Molly was born and raised and grew up in Vancouver, Washington. And they have agreed to both share their memories of the old apple tree, both living here in Vancouver and growing up in Vancouver. So take it away, Molly and Marie.
Okay, hi, I'm Molly McClure, and I was raised here in Vancouver, Washington, born in that house right there. And this is my mother, Marie Nunn. She's just a spring chicken here, not born in Vancouver, but we lived in this residence for 10 years. And we are standing in front of the old city cemetery and really close to the Fort Vancouver Historical Reserve. And the time that we lived here, there was no Highway 14. There was a boat launch down by the Columbia River, and the old apple tree was right across the street.
My husband was director of public works, and it was in the late 60s and early 70s. They presented her with an apple pie from the apple tree.
I worked for the city of Vancouver, and we did a lot of fun events down at the park and stuff. And I think the freeway being built around it is so cool, as well as, you know, the confluence that goes over the freeway. I did not realize that the old tree had passed on and left its babies, but it's the circle of life. And maybe it got a little distressed with all those cars down there. But hey, you know, the fact that it left its babies for us to nurture and maintain and keep the old apple tree alive is pretty cool. And it gives something for our young folks to hang on to and put a date to and try to keep that thing going.
Thank you, Marie and Molly, for sharing this great community history. So next up, we have Kelly Putney. Now, Kelly has been a long-term advocate and caretaker for the old apple tree. Kelly has also worked for many years with the city of Vancouver. He actually served as the former Trails and Greenway manager, and he has been a member of the Washington State Parks and Recreation Commission and part of the Vancouver-Clark Parks and Recreation Advisory Commission. And he's also the caretaker for the Jane Weber Evergreen Arboretum at the Stanger House. Take it away, Kelly.
We're here today to take tribute to the various people who protected the old apple tree over the almost 200 years of its existence here in Vancouver. The tree here behind me was planted in the mid-70s by Harley Mays and myself as a measure to protect the lineage of the tree. Harley Mays took care of the tree for many years from the 30s to the 50s and 60s. He made a major surgery on the tree after the Columbus Day storm, where the tree was severely damaged. If you see the old tree, you'll see there's a huge pipe down through the middle of it. And of course, Harley, with his efforts, made sure that it was safe for good many years. Harley also did the cuttings of the tree, which this tree is a descendant of the original tree. It was very successful because it's about 50 years old now, and as you can see, it's heavily cropped with apples this year. In the early 70s, the Washington State Highway Department was considering a widening of the I-5 freeway and SR 14. At that time, they had recommended that the tree be moved to a new visitor center up at Clark College. At that time, they asked me to propose a method of moving the tree to that location. I got the plans going. The department did the major interchange design, and a group of individual citizens stepped in, known as the Home Orchard Society, and objected to the idea of the tree being moved, as they felt the tree was as much important in its original location as it was to be alive. So they stepped in, went to Washington, D.C., and recruited Senators Jackson and Madison to save the tree in its present location. At that point, the two senators stepped in and proceeded to have the design for the interchange stopped and redesigned, which included a apple tree park and the tree to stay in its original location with much fanfare around the tree itself. At that time, they also committed to an overpass from the apple tree to the Fort Vancouver, and that promise was later carried out, as we know of the land bridge that Maya Lin was involved in designing. It took a number of years to get that connection across to the Fort Vancouver, but it worked out greatly. And today we have that access from the fort to the apple tree park and the site of the original apple tree. As the community knows, we have planted several trees around the community. Many of them were planted in the schools around the district, but not too many of them have survived over the years. So we do have this tree, and we have the tree at the Historical Museum, and both of those trees are very healthy. This tree will be here for many, many years to come. The tree, back in the 70s when we were studying it, we took an apple to England and had it identified. It was identified truly as what they called an English greening tree. And that was because the apple itself never really turns red. It's always a green apple. And it ripens late in the fall, so it's a great winter apple.
Thank you, Kelly, for telling us about this incredible effort concerning the old apple tree. Now, I would like to introduce Dr. Bob Cromwell with the National Park Service at Fort Vancouver Historic Site. Bob is a National Park Service archaeologist and the Chief of Interpretation at Fort Vancouver and the museum manager at Pearson Airfield. So, let's let Bob take it away.
My name is Bob Cromwell. I'm an archaeologist and a park ranger at Fort Vancouver National Historic Site with the National Park Service. And we're standing here in the middle of the replica Hudson's Bay Company orchard here at Fort Vancouver. This is actually a very unique orchard in North America. It's probably one of the only ones planted within the last 20 years that specifically has trees that were managed from seedlings and weren't grafted together. Since the late 19th century, most orchards are managed by grafting technology, where you start with one tree, you cut it down, and then you actually would intermingle it with a second tree into the rootstock of the original tree. And that's how they really manage varietals. In the early 19th century, when the Hudson's Bay Company was here, most orchardists actually just planted apple trees, and whatever came up is what came up. And that's the way we've managed this particular orchard. We've also let these trees grow tall and really minimize the pruning, again, which was common during the 19th century, to really make it look like a 19th century orchard. So today, Washington, of course, is famous for its apples, and the apple industry in Washington State started right here at Fort Vancouver. The histories tell us that the first apples arrived here by seed in 1826 or 1827, and by 1845, the Hudson's Bay Company had close to 500 apple trees in this location. So the U.S. Army arrived in 1849, and by the 1850s, this apple orchard had been removed. But this story is connected to the story of the old apple tree. Interestingly, the old apple tree, which is about half a mile to the southwest of us here, was planted in the Hudson's Bay Company village area. So to my right is the palisaded fort of Fort Vancouver. That's where the gentlemen of the Hudson's Bay Company resided. But off here to the west was the servants' village, where people from all around the world, the main employees and the social heart of this post, all resided. It was a very diverse community. There were people from all over the world, from England, French Canada. We have Iroquois Indians, Chinook Indians. We have Native Americans representing over 30 different tribes, all living and residing together in this one spot. And they worked a variety of jobs. And interestingly, where the old apple tree was planted, through archaeology in the 1980s, they were able to verify that more than likely that tree was planted in the yard of a house associated with the village, which actually had an Englishman living in it by the name of John Johnson. And he was a cooper or a barrel maker. And interestingly, his wife was named Marie Umpqua. She was an Umpqua Indian from Southern Oregon. So it just shows you that diversity. And it's interesting to think of this diverse household actually managing one of the first apple trees in the Pacific Northwest. Now, what's interesting is after the Hudson's Bay Company left in 1860, the U.S. Army, which established Vancouver Barracks, really systematically tried to remove all signs of the Hudson's Bay Company, including this orchard. But the old apple tree, because it was probably growing in isolation in that village, was left alone. So it survived, and it became really the only surviving above ground element of the Hudson's Bay Company, which has been celebrated ever since its discovery as the oldest apple tree in the Pacific Northwest back in 1911. So the National Park Service has been integrally involved in trying to interpret and preserve the old apple tree in partnership with the City of Vancouver. Old Apple Tree Park is actually managed by the City of Vancouver, but the Land Bridge Trail, which crosses Park Service land, ends up at Old Apple Tree Park. And it's this resource that we know was associated directly with the Hudson's Bay Company. So over the last 2 decades, the National Park Service has actually brought in experts in cultural landscapes, as well as orchards, and folks who actually have experience managing historic apple trees in efforts to try and preserve the old apple tree. In 2009, a big windstorm knocked over a big limb off of the old apple tree and really threatened its existence. And working with the city since then, the Park Service has gone through a lot of efforts to try and preserve the tree and extend its lifespan as long as possible. We even purchased and installed a black security fence that is currently around the old apple tree. So the tree has been important to the National Park Service, and we will continue in our efforts to assist the city to continue actually interpreting that site and that park. We're working with the city. I'm a member of the Old Apple Tree Research Team, and we're working with the city now to try and prosper some of the root suckers that are coming up out of the old apple tree. So even though everybody acknowledges that the tree that we actually associate with the old apple tree has died, the canopy has died, the leaves have dried up and all, what's interesting is it really appears that the rootstock from the old apple tree is still alive. And it has sent up all these root suckers, which we've actually been working to prosper. And now some of them are approaching 7 or 8 feet tall. So we're going through the process now of actually determining which of those root suckers we will want to preserve, and we'll actually continue prospering the old apple tree. It's a new next generation of the old apple tree. One thing I forgot to mention earlier is in this replica orchard, all the trees that you see here are actually English rootstock from England, so they're varietals from England, as well as there are several trees in this orchard which we worked with Oregon State University Horticultural Service, Extension Service, and they actually made genetic clones of the old apple tree. So the old apple tree actually lives on in this orchard as well. So I hope you enjoyed this information I provided on the Hudson's Bay Company orchard here and its relationship to the old apple tree, and I hope you're able to continue supporting and enjoying Old Apple Tree Park well into the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob, for talking about this significant history regarding the old apple tree. So up next, we have former Columbian reporter Tom Vogt. Tom had a 44-year career at the Columbia newspaper. One of his particular passions was writing about history. So he's going to share with us the coverage that the tree has received over the years in our local paper, and also some of his own writing that he's talked about regarding our old friend. Take it away, Tom.
I'm Tom Vogt, a former Columbian reporter. I worked here for 43 years before retiring in 2018, and in that time, I was part of a very long reporting tradition in Vancouver. I was one of the people who wrote about the old apple tree. Journalists have been writing about the old apple tree longer than we've been covering any other single living entity in Clark County since the 1880s. I took a look in the museum's digital newspaper collection and found a citation in an 1883 edition of the Vancouver Independent, one of the forerunners of the Columbian where I worked. They had a notation that basically recapped a lot of what we already know about the old apple tree. It cited the story about the apple seeds, the Hudson's Bay officials, and referred to it as the oldest apple tree on the Pacific coast. My own contributions to the coverage included 5 stories I wrote from 2009 to about 2015. They included a story about doing tree surgery with a chainsaw, gathering splinters and twigs to make grafting material to make some repairs on the tree, I wrote about the Old Apple Tree Festival a couple of times and did a story about a fence that was put up to protect the tree from just traffic, because apparently a lot of the foot traffic was pounding the earth, hardening it, making it hard for the tree to actually breathe and get nutrients. So you can see from that that it covered a lot of different reporting beats. History, certainly, a lot of science. We did a big share of arts coverage, festivals, crafts, but there was also just some basic municipal nuts and bolts reporting. We had a story in 1949 about how the city of Vancouver came to an agreement with the federal government. That gave the city an opportunity to take care of a tree that actually was on federal property. In the 1980s, we had a story about how an interchange between Interstate 5 and State Highway 14 got a little complicated when they decided to leave the old apple tree on site, protected by a park, Old Apple Tree Park. It was a $17 million interchange project, and building that park, protecting the tree, took $500,000 out of that budget. At one point, I also saw a note in the 1950s that the old apple tree was featured in one of Ripley's Believe It or Not cartoons that ran in newspapers across the country at that point. As I went through my notes, I started thinking about an entirely different perspective on journalism that influenced the old apple tree. It was in a great position to do some reporting. You take a look at the events that happened within a mile or so of its branches, and you have some of the most significant chapters in the history of the Northwest. After it was planted, the Hudson's Bay Company spent about 2 decades as the most influential organization in this part of America. John McLaughlin and the other people who followed him as chief factor at the Hudson's Bay Company headquarters in Vancouver were among the most influential, most powerful people in the Northwest. The Hudson's Bay Company's reach spanned from the Pacific Ocean to the Rocky Mountains and from San Francisco Bay up to Alaska. When people came across the Oregon Trail, settling this part of America, for them, the end of the Oregon Trail was Fort Vancouver in many cases. The Americans arrived in force in 1849 when the U.S. Army arrived, which opened up an entirely new chapter of history, since that was just about the first American military presence north of what is now San Francisco at that point. For some reason, a lot of these historic eras seem to involve aviation. In 1912, the first interstate airmail flight took off from Portland and landed at Vancouver Barracks. In 1918, Vancouver Barracks was the site of the world's biggest spruce cut-up mill. Timber from all over the Northwest was logged and then shipped to Vancouver to be cut into airplane parts to be used by America's allies, as well as some of the late arriving American warplanes that were used during World War I. In 1937, Vancouver became an international story when Valery Chkalov and 2 of his Russian companions landed at Vancouver Barracks after completing the first transpolar flight from Moscow over the top of the world to Vancouver. In 1943, Vancouver's Kaiser Shipyard started turning out aircraft carriers, more than 50 of them, as well as other warships used during World War II. That brought a workforce of about 38,000 employees to Vancouver, as well as their family members, and that changed a lot of what Vancouver was into what is now a fairly major city. So when Vancouver lost the old apple tree, it didn't affect just local residents. The entire Northwest, and actually our country, lost a living link to a lot of history.
So thank you, Tom, for the incredible stories of our old apple tree. So as we wind down our main program, I want to thank again RealVest for their sponsorship of this program, and also the City of Vancouver. I also can't tell you what an honor it has been to work with these local historians and storytellers from our community. So obviously, we wish this was under different circumstances and that our old friend was still here. However, it was in mid-June of this year that urban forestry at this site here where the old apple tree is at started to notice dying leaves on the tree, and this generated a checkup. And so arborists conducted a thorough evaluation and observed that the cabium layer, I'm probably not saying that right, of the tree, which serves as the arteries that transport water and nutrients to the canopy, had been cut off. And their assessment was that the tree had appeared to have shifted earlier in that month, disrupting this layer, which keeps the tree alive. So the old apple tree does have a significant spiral crack in the trunk that had been expanding over the last several years. And this led to decay and rot in parts of the tree trunk. So even during this time, the canopy of the tree was still healthy and growing, and the tree did continue to flower and produce apples as well. So with the help of the Old Apple Tree research team, the city has been planning for this day by nurturing several root suckers, which are now small trees growing around the old apple tree. So the team has been meeting since 2009, and it's comprised of professionals from the Bartlett Tree Experts, which have donated services to the tree for years, the National Park Service, Joe Bodine, Arborscape Tree Care, and Charles Ray of the city's urban forestry. And the Old Apple Tree research team is planning for the management of the tree and the next steps to assure that its legacy lives on. Now, they've cultivated one sapling towards the center of the tree to follow the historical landscape. And the remaining saplings, they're actually going to be transplanted to the National Park Service orchard. So they're going to remove part of the tree to allow for more light for the sapling, and this part will be preserved by the National Park Service. And then this will leave the remaining shell as a visual interpretation of the life cycle of the tree and let it naturally break down within the enclosure. Now, the Bartlett Tree experts, they have donated years of service to the tree, and they have agreed to continue to do that into the future. So the city is going to continue to call it our old apple tree, and this sapling actually will be on the same root system, just a new stem. And so the old apple tree lives on also in its offsprings planted around the community. So cuttings have been obtained by arborists that have been handing them out to the public for years at the city's annual Old Apple Tree Festival. And this year's annual festival, unfortunately, has been canceled due to COVID, but planning for the 2021 Old Apple Tree Festival is going on, and it will be celebrated the first Saturday in October. So, friends, this is not the end of our Old Apple Tree, but a new beginning. And now, I want to thank you all for joining us for the program today. We really appreciate your support and your care about our Old Apple Tree, and we're looking forward to seeing our new sapling and what the future has to bring. Thank you so much, and take care.
So I'm Brad Wager. I wear many hats in this community as a small business owner of Wager Audio and as a musical performer in the group River Twain. You know, all my roles have some connectedness back to the Old Apple Tree. I'm joined here by my partner in crime in River Twain, Gus Reeves. And of course, Gus, do you want to introduce our special guest today?
This is Mirabai Reeves,
Yeah,
my sweet daughter.
absolutely. You know, so I was born and raised here. Gus has been moved around a little bit and been to different areas, but kind of is an honorary Vancouverite, right?
Yes, I like to
Safe
think so.
say, right? Definitely, definitely. You know, so I have fond memories as a kid growing up here in Vancouver and visiting with my family at the Old Apple Tree Festival and sharing that story. And I think it's just a testament to the power of this community bringing history and our connection to the past to life through events, you know, community gatherings and all this stuff. And it's, you know, drawn us all here in this example to be together today in this forum, right, sharing our stories and kind of continuing to share the Old Apple Tree story for many years to come. So you know, as I've grown up, and I've got a family of my own too, like Gus, and it's, you know, it's fun to have been able to share the history and the new memories as our kids have grown up. You know, I get to bring my pal Gus. He's kind of an extended member of the Wager family, and he's been coming down to perform at the event with me. And you know, as Mirabai has gotten older, I think Mirabai's been coming the last 2 years. Is that right?
I think she only went the last time.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's been really fun,
I'm
right?
glad she got to go.
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. And hopefully we're able, through the work of the tree service and the folks who are doing what they can to kind of share the memory, we'll be able to continue to celebrate, in the
That's
future.
awesome.
So I don't know, Gus, what do you guys think? What are your memories and your thoughts about what you know about the old apple tree and the history that you want to share?
I love the story. The story's so romantic and beautiful, and to think that, like, such a, I mean, even just someone who likes apples a lot, like you moved to Washington, because I haven't always lived here. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And so, and the booming industry all coming from that one mother tree, and the story behind it is too cool.
Very powerful, right? Yeah.
I thought it was the old daddy tree.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't.
Well,
is it the mommy or the daddy tree, Brad?
I think they call it the mommy tree, is how they describe it. Yeah, that's the way I've heard it. It's of course. So as we look back, right, 200 years. If we're looking back at the origin of this tree, like you touched on, Gus, I want to encourage, folks in our community to remember, that their actions and the actions of this young man and this young woman, right, remembering each other through the core and the seeds of this apple, right, a world away, and that they can have just such a huge ripple effect for many years to come, right?
Yeah.
So I want to encourage our friends and neighbors, when you go out into the world on person or online, that you just do your part, right, to share encouragement. And, Gus has a great song from years ago that I want to quote where he said, the parts make up the whole, so you can make a difference. And I want to just encourage everybody to go out into the world and create the kind of positive ripples in our community today that'll influence, inspire many generations to come.
Yeah, plant positive seeds. Yeah, that's beautiful, man.
Thanks, y'all.
For sure.
My name is Jenny Thompson, and I work with the Police Activities League here in Southwest Washington, and I'm here to share with you my story of the old apple tree. Now, I didn't grow up here in Vancouver, but I love history, and Brad, he knows this about me. I grew up in a small town about 4 hours north of here, and history was a huge part of our community. And so when I moved to Vancouver, it made me just as excited to hear that we were a town steeped in such rich history. And one of my favorite stories that I've heard over the years is the one of the old apple tree. Now, one of my friends, Tyler Shavers, has already shared most of that stories, and I'm sure you know it better than I. But for me, the apple tree gives me hope, and it also is a piece that has become a big fundraiser for us here at PAL, because of the Apple Tree Marathon Half K and full marathon that we do in partnership with Y Racing and Peace Health. And it's pretty cool because we actually get to run by that tree every single year. And this year's the third annual event. Even though it's virtual, many of us will still try to find a way to run by that tree. So, although I don't have a personal huge connection growing up here, I love the old apple tree. I love the stories I get to hear. I love the history that we have here in Vancouver, and that's part of it. It's pretty cool that we have the oldest apple tree in Washington State, if not maybe the country, and that it produced fruit for so long, and it makes me sad that it's no longer with us, but I'm grateful that it has its children and grandchildren that are living on. So thank you for hearing my little bit of story, my memory of the apple tree, and hope you have a great day. Thank you.
Hi there. We wanted to share our memories of the old apple tree. And for many, many years, our family has gone down there, my son Trenton and my daughter Taylor, to visit the tree.
Yes, I remembered our family memories of going there, and we're sad to have it gone.
Yeah, we're really sad that it has died, but we will go around and visit the siblings that it has. So thank you for giving us this opportunity. Bye.
Bye.
Hi, Carissa with My Racing Events here, and just reflecting back on what the old apple tree means to Y Racing Events. I feel it means a sense of community. We've built an amazing relationship in our community with Peace Health around this apple tree. We've built an amazing relationship within our community with Police Activities League, thanks to this old apple tree. And we get to work with some pretty amazing community leaders because of the old apple tree. That, to us, with Y Racing, that is a very, very important part of what it is to be a a big part of the community, and we feel fortunate for that. With that being said, we're really fortunate that we get to at least have a virtual Peace Health Apple Tree Marathon, Half Marathon, and 5K this year. You know, with uncertain times that we live in, it's scary to think that so many things are being canceled and we're not able to do the things that we normally get to do. And we don't get to do the event like we normally get to do, but we do get to have a marked course thanks to the city of Vancouver and Fort Vancouver and all the amazing people that work in our city that are allowing us to mark the course for you all for a whole week. So we hope that you come down to Eatery at the Grant House and start your marathon, half marathon, or 5K. So there's so many other things that are going on that weekend. So September 19th through 27th is going to be the event week. We thought, you know what, let's not just give it a weekend like we normally do. Let's give you a whole week so you can do lots of fun things within that week. So you could run the half marathon, the marathon, or the 5K. You could also do what we're calling our marathon challenge. So you can run a marathon over the period of those 9 days. Break it up. Do it 5 miles, 3 miles every day. Break it up so you meet that challenge of running your first marathon. Maybe you just aren't ready to do a full marathon and you want to do it over a number of days. So pick the marathon or the half marathon and do the marathon challenge with us. Our other pretty exciting challenge that we are looking at doing that we are going to do for this event is Portland versus Vancouver 5K challenge. We want to see which city is the fastest. So let's go Vancouver, let's get all signed up. Let's see, can we take on Portland? Can we take on Portland city leaders? Can we take on their community event organizers? Let's see who the fastest city is. With all that being said, we're pretty excited that we get to do a walk through history with you all here in a couple of weeks for the Peace Health Apple Tree Marathon, Half Marathon, 5K. Don't forget, kids 12 and under, run the 5K for free. Make it a family event, bring your kids out. Spend the time with them, and we hope that you guys all enjoy the event as much as we do. And Old Apple Tree, we're going to miss you. Thank you.
My favorite memory of the Old Apple Tree is the festival that they have every year. It had a great small town feel to it, and you got to make cider and bring home a apple tree start.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Hawks-Conwright, and I am the Development Director of Columbia Springs. As a girl growing up here in Vancouver, I've had a lot of fond memories of the Old Apple Tree, starting with my parents taking us there to look at its beauty, and I was just amazed by all the history it had seen, and it actually, going there gave me a love of history that carried on throughout my life, and I was able to pass on that tradition that my family and I had of going to the apple tree to my own children, starting with my son 23 years ago, and now with my twins. We go and visit the Old Apple Tree all the time and talk about the history and just how rich our community is in history of the United States. And I love visiting the Old Apple Tree, and it's been one of the staple in my life, and I just have so many fond memories of that tree. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Tyler Chavers, and a friend of mine from the Clark County Museum, Brad, asked if I'd say a few words about what the Old Apple Tree meant to me. You know, I always enjoy a great story, one that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, one that touches the heart, and one that we share and pass around, and sometimes we get the details wrong, but the story just keeps getting better. And I can remember when I moved to Vancouver in 2004, and one of the first things I heard about that was part of the fabric of Vancouver and Clark County and even Washington State was that Vancouver was home to the oldest apple tree. I would say some dared to venture it was the oldest apple tree known in the United States. But for sure, the oldest apple tree in Washington State, known for its apple crops. Much later, through my job, I connected with some folks at the historic Vancouver house there, about 45th and Main, and I learned a story about the Old Apple Tree and its origins. And I might have the details wrong, but I believe it involved a young man who was enamored with a young lady, and I believe maybe asked her to dance, something like that. And anyhow, struck up a conversation or a relationship. And at some point, there was an apple that he had that she either took a bite or two of, or he shared with her. Or in any case, it was something that reminded him of her and his feelings about her that were obviously positive. And so he saved the apple core in his pocket of his jacket, and at some later date planted it. And that old apple tree, or that apple core, grew up to be the old apple tree. And then I also heard that while the old apple tree has had its beginning and its middle, and now we're at the end, that many offspring have come from the old apple tree, that there have been seeds from apples and grafts directly from the tree itself. And one of those trees, a grandson or granddaughter of the old apple tree, is actually outside the Clark County Historic Museum there on Main Street. So, like all good stories, the old apple tree will live on forever, although maybe not in its current location, but definitely in the hearts and minds of those who will remember the story. Something that we can rally around, even though the tree won't be there to rally around any longer. I've run there over the land bridge quite a few times, and I always remember as I run past the old apple tree, a story kind of flashes through my mind, something that I'll miss. I'm guessing that the city may put up some kind of a memorial or a iconic reminder of the old apple tree there in its place. So the memory will still last as long as the stories last. So I hope we keep the story going. Thanks. Take care.